afternoon. My name is Joe Bandel and I am the last Rosicrucian. Today we're going to talk about Oak Advantage number 26, forced evolution. Now, using the term evolution, this is not going to be exactly the way that it's commonly used and understood, but please bear with me. It does tie in. I'm going to start out with the photon. And according to Dewey Larson's reciprocal systems theory, the photon flashes out into an empty universe, let's say an empty galaxy or whatever. It flashes out as far as it can go, and then it comes back. And we can talk about how it might be like a horned torus, whatever. In many ways, we're just saying that it acts like a wave at one part and as a particle at the other part. Okay, but now, let's say, according to chaos theory, we're adding chaos theory in here. Chaos theory talks about energy systems, and not just any energy system, but progressive energy systems, because that is what we live in, is a progressive energy system, and that progressive energy system evolves. So, what I'm going to try to describe in words is the evolution of this photon, and how this whole everything that exists is caught up in a progressive energy system that evolves over time. Because once you get the hang of this, you kind of understand it's a key factor for some very important concepts that we're going to be talking about later on. So this photon goes out as far as it can in all directions, and then it comes back in on the returns part of the cycle. Part of it's as a wave, part of it's as a particle, or it appears that way. But in reality, what we consider the space-time universe is three-dimensional, which we consider the physical world to be three-dimensional, and time-space, which we consider the time, or actually the astral, as being three-dimensional also. And this movement is happening through space and through time. And it's happening in both of them in three-dimensional ways. But anyway, when you talk about a progressive system, a progressive energy system, like in chaos theory, you have a photon coming out, then it's coming back, but as it comes almost back to the beginning point, the origin point, and it is met by another flash that's going out. And then that one comes back in and never makes it quite to the beginning point, the origin point, because it is met by an outgoing flash. So what you have happening is you have waves going out, and that the very first wave, or the very first photon, is always on the outer edge, and the other ones are on the inner edge, and they're forcing that outer one out further. So if you can imagine ripples going out, so you have a beginning point and you have that first ripple, and then that moves to the out, and a new ripple forms in the middle, and just the next ripple, and the outer one is forced outward. And this keeps happening with this photon flashing, pulsing, outward and inward, outward and inward. And you get a point where these waves, these circular waves like ripples in a pond, they get out toward the edge and they start to crowd each other because they're kind of pushing, they're reaching the limit of what's possible to do, and they're crowding each other. Whereas in the middle, those waves might be that far apart. Way at the end, they're squeezed together. You can look at the light spectrum, and it would show just the same thing of how that's kind of happening. There's a crowding together of these waves before it switches to another color. So anyway, what happens is they gradually crowd closer and closer together as they get to this ultimate extremity of where they can't go any further. And then the system crashes. It becomes chaotic. And what happens is there's a quantum leap. It's a quantum leap to another type of energy system. That's the basics of what chaos theory is talking about, all right? But you take this idea of stressing and constant input without any taking out, constant input, pushing and pushing and crowding until it can't go any further, and it's forced to transform into another type of energy system. We can say that, as an example, helium, which just has one electron, one proton, one neutron, whatever, we can say that it reaches the end of the cycle where it is forced to become helium, meaning it adds two electrons, two protons. So it becomes something totally different as a different energy system. And it keeps going like that as it builds through the different elemental stages, with each Nobel gas representing the completion of one of 7 electron rings. You kind of following how I'm saying that? And this is because the horn torus shape exists everywhere. It not only exists as an atom, but it exists as the center of our galaxy. And the center of our galaxy is pulsing. You can say it's a gigantic photon, I don't care what you want to say, but it's pulsing. And it is putting out these waves, just like I described with the photon. And toward the center, the waves are a little bit further apart, but as it gets out toward the edge, they get closer and closer and closer together. And there is a point where they crowd so close together that you could say they touch each other and short out, and the entire system, the galactic system, if you will, restarts. It does a quantum leap and it comes back as another energy system. Something happens. Now we're taught how long that could be. I'm just saying that this is the idea of the system, and it's forcing those photons, these things that started out as photons, is forcing them to be atoms. Okay, atoms of each of, there's 118 possible elements. It forces them to become a heavier and heavier and heavier element until finally it reaches element 118, which is a Nobel gas. oganesson. And that noble gas, the heaviest possible element, is invisible, it's weightless, or it's tasteless. You can't sense it in any way. And I'm maintaining that the emptiness of space could very well be this giant sea of oganesson that we take as empty space, but it's not. It's the opposite. It's a noble gas that represents the most complete element possible, and everything else that exists is just a soup mix that's kind of inside of it. That's neither here nor there. What I want to kind of get across is this idea of forcing, because each time a new pulse enters this energy system, it forces the oldest photons or whatever to age, to go out further. It forces hydrogen to become helium, and helium to become lithium, and so on like that, to the actual formation of physical matter. Not only that, you're getting a forced evolution of DNA strands, and let's go back to the galactic center putting out pulses and putting out waves. Now, Ben Davidson of Suspicious Observers does a tremendous job of explaining the latest scientific evidence from every day. He shares scientific papers that he's read and he's been up on that are talking about the idea of a galactic current sheet. And that galactic current sheet actually exists. It exists in two layers that's on the horizontal plane, while our entire galaxy is one of these huge horn torus shapes, with the physical matter being in the middle as a galactic current sheet that has waves or ripples that go out like that. And that our solar system, our sun, and the earth, and our entire solar system is located within those ripples, within those waves. Now, I was just reading about those waves. The galactic current sheet, I believe they're talking about, that's where the 12,000 year cycle comes in. That every 12,000 years, one of these ripples is going to hit our solar system. And when it hits our solar system, obviously it's hitting our sun, it's hitting every planet within our solar system, it's hitting the earth, and it's hitting the moon. And when it hits, certain activities are taking place. They're being forced to evolve. So we're talking about galactic forcing of events. And I'm going to take the shift now from the galactic place to the sun, to the solar place, because we're talking about a lot of science now is beginning to talk about solar forcing of weather, solar forcing of climate, solar forcing of the flip or the switch of a magnetic pole, the magnetic field, the Earth's magnetic field, the sun's magnetic field changes from south to north and north to south every 11 years. They've known this for years. Well, what Earth is going to do the same thing, but in what time frame is this going to happen? And we're talking about how it's not a perfectly horizon, but there's a kind of a elliptic in which the sun has its own current sheet, its own like disk that comes out, and during certain parts of the year the earth is above it, other times it's below it, above it, below it, and every time it crosses, I think it's like every 2 weeks, he talks about when that happens, but that also is forcing events to happen. What you're talking about is cycles within cycles within cycles, and they are all regular. They're perfectly timed, just like vibratory motion, vibratory waves, like waves. And just like hydrogen is forced by the new incoming photons, it's forced to eventually turn into helium, and each cycle is forced to make a quantum leap to the next cycle, where we go from physical matter to living matter to cellular matter, and forced to take a quantum leap that way. We're all part of this cycle. And this is why each one of us in the metaphysical world, the occult world, we're all considered divine sparks or parts of God, because we started out as photons. We started out as that divine spark, and we have evolved through the animal kingdom, through the plant kingdom, through the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human, to where we are today. And we're ancient in terms of how long we've been around, but we still have a long way to go. And we're being forced to evolve, forced to grow. This is the concept that I'm talking about. And what I'm getting at, the main point here, is that these magnetic pole shifts, polar excursions, or magnetic excursions that they talk about, these happen on a regular basis. And we are currently experiencing a magnetic excursion that's the beginning of a magnetic pole shift. The North Magnetic Pole is moving at least 30 miles per year towards Siberia and further. And the South Pole is moving in the same way. And what's interesting is you can say that, how do you look? The North Pole's here and the South Pole's here, and you can say that as you turn one, the other one's going to go that way. That's not what's happening. What's happening is one's going one way, the other one's going to meet it. Kind of like it's going from a bar magnet and turning into a horseshoe magnet. And what's that going to do? What we're talking about is there is going to be, and there has been, pretty much religiously every 12,000 years, the poles, the North and South poles, have moved to the equator, with the ice caps. They've moved. Then that ice is melted gradually. 12,000 years later, they're moving back to where they were. They're moving there. They're moving back. Ben Davidson does an excellent job of interpreting and reading and discussing the scientific papers that are talking about this. The thing is that we are in the process of one of these, and Earth's magnetosphere is weakening. It's not weakening because of man-made climate change or carbon dioxide. It's not weakening because of that. There is climate change, but the climate change is happening because of the weakening of Earth's magnetosphere, which is happening because this galactic wave is interacting with our solar system, interacting with the sun, which is also interacting with the Earth, forcing it to make a quantum leap, forcing it to change, forcing it to evolve. It's a forced evolution of the entire chain that comes through. And that in turn is forcing us to change. And that's what the New Age community is talking about: Gaia's ascension, or Earth's ascension, or humanity's ascension. Because we are in the process of going through a quantum leap to a new type of world, to a new type of Earth, to a new type of humanity. And some of us are aligned with this new energy, with the new change, and others are not aligned. And this is one of the things that needs to be brought up and expressed, because it's an evolutionary, it's a progressive energy system that's forcing these things to happen, and it's nothing that any one of us can do about it. This is bigger than anybody. This is bigger than all of us. All we can do is get through it like humanity has gotten through it for during the last 12,000 years, the last 12,000 years before that, and the last 12,000 years before that. We're talking about calamity. We're talking about calamity, the science of global catastrophism. And we're talking about how the governments of this world, the elite of this world, know about it, they understand it, they know when it's happening, they got their eye on it, and they have a plan for how some of us are going to survive. Most of us are not going to survive when you get a big shift, a tilting of the poles and of the Earth itself, where the Arctic and Antarctic suddenly land up on the equator. That's going to mess with a lot of people. And that is coming within the next 20 to 30 years, within our lifetimes. But before it happens, things are just going to get worse and worse and worse. And what's going to happen is the Earth's magnetosphere is going to get weaker and weaker and weaker until something from the sun, a massive solar flare, mini nova, whatever type of thing, is going to trigger the change. And it's going to happen in the same process of these waves are coming, or we're being hit, we're being hit, we're being hit. And it stresses things out until it can't take anymore, and wham, quantum leap, the change happens. But what's going on in the meantime is this same forcing, vibrational forcing, you could say, is affecting us. It's causing our shadow to erupt. It's causing psychotic behavior in a lot of people that have not worked to integrate the shadow aspect. We're seeing, especially people that are head trippers, that are living in their head and they are not connected to the earth. You need to be grounded as much as possible through these time periods. Because it's forcing open energy pathways. It's forcing things to happen. We've repressed emotions. We've repressed things. We've refused to deal with certain things. It's building, it's building, it's building. You look at the things that are going on in this world today, the global financial market, the Ukraine, Russia issue, the food shortage. There are no solutions because we don't have the time. We only have the 20 years or so until things fall apart. It could happen any point between now and the next 30 years. But they know that it's going to happen, and it's like, what's the point of trying to get anything new? This is why nobody's fixing anything. What they're trying to do is make things limp along as long as they can, and when they fall apart, it's every man for themselves. We're already starting to see that our leaders, our politicians, are not paying any attention to what the ordinary person wants, because they're looking out for themselves, basically. We have to start, as ordinary people, we have to start looking out for ourselves too. And what that means is trying to create self-sustaining communities that are not dependent on things from far away. Because at some point, this is what we're going to be living in as things get worse and worse. As the static electricity in the atmosphere and in the world and in our minds gets worse and worse and worse. And the insanity gets worse and worse. Not in everybody, but in certain people that are not integrating. They're not able to process or integrate the shadow selves. It's in the process of erupting. This is why you're seeing the leaders of governments all around the world doing crazy things and acting crazy and demanding crazy things. The neocons, war, 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 all of that stuff. We have to say no. We have to say, hey, we got enough problems right now. We got to start kind of grouping together on a localized basis. Start thinking about self-sustaining communities. Anyway, that's the end of this. I'll be talking about some of these things later as they come up. But I thought this would just be the first. Thank you.